Oscar Wilde once said, "There is no such thing as a moral or immoral book. Books are well written or badly written, that is all." Okay.
This movie really has no inner dialogue whatsoever, very little in the way of any subtext. I genuinely feel like the moral of this film is just be as impulsive and as stupid as you can possibly be, and it'll just be all cool. Don't worry.
Anthony Fantano made a Marty Supreme review that I disagree with, and now I hate him.
There have been some recent Timothée Chalamet films I haven't necessarily been crazy about, be it the Wonka movie.
Boo! Wonka hater. Boo! We don't like Wonka haters. We don't like Wonka haters here.
And Marty, even though he's like a massive piece of shit repeatedly, like at numerous points over and over and over, he's like still a good guy with a heart of gold. Look at him. When he sees his own son through the glass at the hospital, he cries. Meanwhile, me, after watching what he had done for the past 2 hours, I'm thinking, that kid is fucked. His dad's gonna run out on him.
Has anyone else ever noticed that the first 2 hours of a film influenced how they felt about the ending? Call the cucurbitologist, because this melon was
one of the most overinflated pieces of crap I've seen this decade so far.
Now, I want to be clear, it's a divisive film, and you are allowed to dislike Marty Supreme. And I get that might sound like I'm preemptively giving myself a pass to now be overly defensive about Marty Supreme. It's definitely right to be skeptical of Marty Mauser's change of heart. In service of ping pong, Marty has at this stage spent almost the entire movie scamming people, endangering the life of his best friend, the beloved pet whose life he was entrusted with, and his pregnant girlfriend.
You did amazing. You're on your chin. You did so good. You did such a good job. I love you.
Or more specifically, a girl he refuses to call his girlfriend, pregnant with a baby he refuses to acknowledge as his own. This guy might be a scumbag. Or maybe the baby isn't his, because both him and Rachel are compulsive liars who'll always say exactly what they need to say to get what they want in any given situation, much in the way Marty's mum fabricates a serious illness early in the film to pressure him to talk to her. In this world of lies on lies on lies, there are many lies, and the only reason we know Marty being the dad isn't a lie is because of this opening sequence, which I don't think the characters could really see. Why am I saying all of this? Because these are things in the movie, and as I understand it, good film criticism is when you summarize things. But also, because these are things in the movie, I'd still say they're quite important.
What makes this movie awful isn't just that Marty is a bad guy, it's that the film itself and the progression of events essentially okays this behavior and says, yeah, that's fine. If you just like repeatedly act this way forever, it'll all work out.
Depiction isn't automatically endorsement, and I think there's a tendency for people, especially online, to focus on moralizing isolated parts of a story without considering their role in a wider narrative, and that's actually the thesis of this video. No, I'm not talking about The Pit today. The first time I watched Marty Supreme, I kind of did so only knowing it was a Timothée Chalamet movie about a guy who plays table tennis. And during the first 15 minutes or so, I started thinking about Rocky. Not just for it being an underdog sports movie, but especially at the part where Marty just decides to rob his uncle's shoe store to get his ping pong money.
Let me take what I'm owed and I'll give you an even $100 when I get back.
Not interested.
Boy, come on, look at me, please.
You want to borrow, you gotta pay the man. Hey, I ain't emotionally involved, Bob, you understand? Give me some money.
It reminded me of the reveal early on that Rocky actually earned his living as a debt collector, stalking people and threatening to break their thumbs at work to make money for his scumbag boss, who incidentally Rocky also invites to his wedding. And I started thinking about how, for as much as that was all clearly about emphasizing the desperate reality Rocky lives in, it still feels quite idealized in the full context of these films.
So why don't you break his thumb like I told you to? When you don't do what I tell you to do, you make me look bad, right?
Rocky himself is so underlined as the nicest possible goon who avoids hurting anyone, and it would make basically no sense to imagine his relationship with Tony Gazzo as one that would last long. But more importantly, it's a dark, messy part of Rocky's life he's able to effectively shake off consequence-free as soon as he proves himself as a genuine talent. And if you bring up Rocky V, honestly, fuck off. At least in that initial rags to riches story, part of the Rocky wish fulfillment is that these immoral, violent parts of his life get to be incidental and no longer meaningfully affect or define him, something he can essentially wash away. I'd argue it's easy to watch these movies without feeling Rocky did much of anything that was especially morally compromising, except, I think, maybe stand up to Paulie a little bit more. The film is, in a way, having its cake and eating it too, presenting the idea that life in the lower class forces you to get your hands dirty, makes your own moral principles another thing to be coldly bought and sold, but never especially challenges us on seeing Rocky as a good guy we should root for. Marty Supreme also starts us from the dark, messy part of Marty's story, the rags part where he hustles his way through poverty. It's self-modelled on real-life table tennis player Marty Reisman, who hustled his way through poverty. Except, and I believe this is where Anthony's problems began, we're made very aware of every bad thing Marty Mauser says or does.
Look, you struck a nerve, I struck a nerve, okay? Now we're even.
Get out.
Not only do things generally not work out for Marty, almost every time we get to see in excruciating detail what things not working out looks like, abruptly throwing off the direction of the film on almost every occasion. Whether or not Marty was being withheld a wage and stole his money out of impoverished desperation, he still has to go back home and those problems are still waiting for
I'm gonna
him.
step up.
Oh, you're gonna step up
I'm gonna
how?
step up in a way you can't even imagine. She's gonna be living on 5th Avenue in an apartment, a building with an elevator, and a man who works in the elevator that takes her up every time she needs to use it.
And the reason he has to go back home is because both times he's given massive potential opportunities, the choices he makes instantly get him shut down.
I'm finding this whole exchange really offensive.
Runs a scam, gets caught. Scoops goop, gets caught. Scam ruined, and when he tries to literally wash his hands of it, notice how rarely in the film we ever cut away from Marty's perspective. Then note that on 2 of those occasions, the moment he loses the dog and the moment he pushes Rachel back to her abusive boyfriend so he can go practice, that's when the focus instead moves away. It's about as directly as the film could possibly express, we are aware of who Marty is and the outcomes of his behavior, and we want that part of him to be something you think about while seeing him in his most vulnerable human moments. I think this is my main problem with this kind of criticism, because what I usually hear is something like, I'm not saying the story is bad because it's showing something bad, I'm just not convinced the people making it knew it was bad. And I think sometimes a lot can be learned from pointing out blind spots in artists' perspectives. I'm not talking about the pit today. The easy response is to just accuse them of being offended by something that doesn't give them a clear moral binary and makes them sit with uncomfortable feelings. And a lot of the time, that is quite unfair and dismissive to say. But when we're talking about a film that does so clearly lay out this quite didactic series of sins and punishments leading to a moment the main character has to reckon with that, and your criticism is effectively that this moment even exists to have to reckon with, yeah, it starts to feel like that's the problem.
Marty, as a person, is kind of a massive piece of shit, which isn't inherently a bad thing. I mean, sometimes evil does win, and I do occasionally love an anti-hero. But the thing is, Marty Supreme never forces Marty to reckon with his bad behavior, his evil ways, through either an inner dialogue or voice, or any kind of serious consequences for his actions.
The thing about Marty Supreme is almost the entire movie is consequences. Literally just an endless spiraling nightmare of consequences and desperate attempts to work through them. And this final ping pong game that Anthony here expresses being disheartened about because he was struggling to root for Marty in it, is the sum total of those consequences repeatedly slamming Marty Mauser in the face.
What? You have wasted your time coming here.
In this moment, Marty gets exactly what he wanted, a clear, triumphant, one big shot to show off his talent, very much in the vein of a Rocky. And it's a dead end anyway, because he's already burned every career lifeline he had and instead has to hitch a ride home with little to show for it, other than bending over backwards to make some other guy a ton of money.
Son of a bitch, I gave you the idea!
All this hustling will only ever add up to a forgotten, one-off sideshow. Marty's actions through this stage of his rags to riches story don't just meaningfully affect him, they mean he doesn't get the rags to riches story. In this way, it has more in common with stated inspiration The Hustler, which follows a similarly talented pool player who ends up losing any chance at future success despite proving himself on a purely skill-based level.
Fat man, you shoot a great game of pool.
So do you, Fast Eddie.
Actually, the plot and characters in this movie just straight up reward Marty for 2 hours. It's like if Sandler in Uncut Gems didn't read as like annoying and awkward to any of the other characters in the film, and he never had to contend with his gambling addiction or how shitty of a partner he's been, and everybody around him was just so enamored with his aura that they did anything he wanted at any given time. That's pretty much how life plays out for Marty.
The way Anthony says it here, it's like Marty Supreme may as well be The Greatest Showman or something, like a movie that's just gleefully cheering on the success of its horrifically evil main character. Find a natural plug for your Oz the Great and Powerful video. But frankly, this suggests like the room level ignorance from these filmmakers about the thing they were making, which is odd from a criticism that also heavily praises the last thing they made.
Shocking considering the very well-struck balance of social commentary and character development you get from a film like Uncut Gems.
In its actual content, Marty Supreme is almost cosmically bent around making sure we don't look past or excuse the seedy things Marty involves himself in, to the point where almost a third of the movie is built around this tangent about holding a dog for ransom, and its continued escalation over and over. And did you know that was Penn from Penn and Teller? And the first time I watched, I was like, "Ah, damn, that's disappointing. When are we getting back to the ping pong factory?" In retrospect, I think it's exactly what makes Marty Supreme not what Anthony is accusing it of.
It's every man for himself where I come from. That's just how I grew up, okay? Sometimes I feel like I don't even have control over
I'm really not interested in your excuse.
No, I know, it's not an excuse, it's just...
Reality tells us social mobility is a trap, that most people will end up getting dragged right back to the financial class they were born in, that generally speaking, the rich will get richer because they control the means by which people get rich in the first place. Extreme poverty is, for the most part, a condition that's inflicted on a population, a mechanism of control, not something meant to be escaped, and the few that do are often forced to make extreme sacrifices to do so. I don't need you to agree, only Mr. Fantano. But in the go-getter rags to riches story, the rags part is a sort of brief, vague aesthetic of poverty to cleanly ascend out of, because of course anyone can ascend out of it with the right mindset, especially if they're good at a sport, because the idea that there's a system that materially limits or outright blocks success is too messy and complicated to sell. That real success might force people to make significant compromises on family, health, or personal principles, it's a buzzkill. And that leads us to the most basic hustle. Give someone hope in something you know is impossible, and exploit that hope. And there is no doubt, watching this story unfold, that Marty Mauser is a hustler. And there is no doubt, for all the same reasons, that Marty Mauser is getting hustled.
As far as the progression of the movie goes, what progression? This film is actually more like ping pong than it is about ping pong. What I mean by that is I feel like we're kind of just getting aggressively smacked back and forth from one scene to the next as we move from random side quests to self-imposed injury or challenge.
If we imagine Marty Supreme as an extension of the hustling character of Marty, we get a movie that first presents itself as an exciting underdog rags to riches story, and then descends into a series of banal schemes and constant tangents into the most embarrassing and miserable parts of life.
Total garbage. Costume jewelry.
Costume jeweler.
Yeah.
Oh.
Pulling Marty away from anything close to what he'd pitched himself to be. In other words, what the rags part of life actually is. As Anthony says, side quests, diverting people out of manic necessity away from some idealized path because unfortunately they have to live in the real material world. It's a complete breakdown of the basic hustler narrative, that there's this one weird trick to getting around material consequences or even just basic reality. And far from this idea that Marty Supreme is just another recycled narrative about selfish, greedy assholes with big dreams getting away with it, Timmy's 50s Wolf of Wall Street where after everything Marty Belfort winks at the screen, and we know he'll never change because he never has to.
Sell me this pen.
I think it's a story in part about a person trying to live out that narrative, watching it and the dreams he's tied to it die. You know why I think we like Rocky in a way we don't like Marty Mauser? Because Rocky moves like a guy who could have been dropped into almost any time or place in human history and basically be unchanged.
How's about investing in condominiums? It's safe.
Condominiums?
Yeah, condominiums.
I never use them.
Rocky could be like a 13th century Mongolian farmer or some slave of the Byzantine Empire, and he'd still just be a straightforward, dependable, humble guy with no particularly high ambitions.
I fight in clubs, you know, and I'm really a ham and egg. This guy, he's the best, and it wouldn't be such a good fight. Thank you very much, you know.
And if he succeeds, it's certainly not because of anything calculated or ruthless in him, but because he just happened to be gifted a limited path to do so. There's a reason his natural qualities are so frequently contrasted with a manufactured artificial opponent, a performative Apollo Creed, Machine Man Ivan Drago. Rocky is not shaped by his society. Society, at best, finds a shape around him. Marty Mauser is painfully shaped by his society.
My mother died in childbirth, and my father was a compulsive loser who abandoned me when I was 2 years old. I got stuck in the New York City orphanage system, got shuttled from one hellhole to the next, naturally got in trouble with the law. But I don't want any of that to define me. You can use that.
Use it for what?
For an advertisement or something. I don't know. You're the business guy.
Marty doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve for most of this film as a more likable character might, and as we spend more time with him, we see that's very much on purpose.
What's going on? Buddy, how are you? Hey, we have a meeting with Spalding first thing in the morning for the Supreme samples. Thyone set up. Thyone, tell him.
I was got a friend in the stagehands union, and I was dropping something off for him.
Marty's life is an endless stream of white lies invented to bypass any block he's confronted with, and honesty around his feelings or motivations are usually just another costly inconvenience he has to work around. Now obviously, a white lie isn't like a legal distinction. It's a rough guess of how much harm was caused by the deception put against the harm prevented by it. And while virtue, ethics, and most conventional moral standards might say a lie is itself a harm, so being a liar inherently makes you a harmful person, this is the part where I say the word deontology. Marty says, "Why should I care about your standards? The world doesn't."
Let me explain to you. I was born in 1601. I'm a vampire.
I don't think it fully makes sense to go in on Marty's lack of commitment to being a virtuous, humble subject of his society without the context that this movie is like 6 years after the Holocaust. And this isn't something the film shies away from.
I'm gonna do to Kletsky what Auschwitz couldn't. Okay, I'm gonna finish the job. It's alright, I'm Jewish, I could say that.
One of the most memorable stories in the film is told by Kletsky, a Holocaust survivor and one of Marty's early opponents, who at one point found a large supply of honey while working at the camps and hid it on his own body to provide sustenance to his bunkmates. Now in the context of this situation, Marty is using Kletsky as dinner theater for his attempt to woo a potential business partner.
Used to defuse bombs to the Nazis. Tell him the story you told me about,
I've got
the
a whole
bees.
table of people
And I often see this presented as a contrast between these two Jewish men. Marty is happy to wear a gold Star of David necklace throughout the film. He's happy to flaunt himself, not just as Jewish, but a kind of ultimate Jewish victory over the Nazis.
I'm here. I did it. I'm on top. I'm the ultimate product of Hitler's defeat. Yeah, write that down. That was good. Yeah. Write that down.
But he doesn't really care about this part of his identity. He doesn't care about anything. He thinks Auschwitz is a joke and Kletsky's story is a funny anecdote. He doesn't recognize that Kletsky's story reveals a deep humility Marty lacks. The humility to literally use your own body to feed the desperate. Marty doesn't know this kind of humility because he doesn't know this kind of suffering. Kletsky is the good Jew, and Marty is the bad Jew. And I think that, again, feels like a limiting perspective. Do we truly believe that Marty Mauser, spending his entire early childhood as a Jew in poverty in the 1930s and 40s, doesn't understand Jewish persecution? Chalamet had numerous old scars painted into his face to play Marty. One of his defining traits is how he seems used to being in extremely stressful, traumatic situations. It's a strong indication that he has had a rough childhood, and certainly isn't like a coddled kid who doesn't know what it means to be made humble. I feel like when he brings this story up to Milton Rockwell, it's in an effort to humble him, to throw him off as the uptight millionaire hearing the grotesque life experiences of another Jew. And Milton, sensing this, gets defensive, reasserting dominance by trying to use his son's death to somehow trump what Kletsky just told him, inviting Kletsky to thank him for his service.
My son lost his life liberating you.
I'm sorry for your loss.
A little while later, Marty loses his opportunity with Rockwell, and while doing sideshows in Egypt, cracks off a piece of a pyramid to gift to his mother, asserting that they, as Jews, had built those pyramids. Marty's ruthlessness doesn't come out of ignorance or indifference, but survival strategies born out of a conscious understanding that he is in a hostile, dog-eat-dog world, and all the learned helplessness and self-humiliation rituals might make for a good moral fable, but you don't win by doing that. You win by hustling your way to a position of power so you can do and demand whatever you want. This is what we call the art of the deal.
I have an obligation to see a very specific thing through, and with that obligation comes sacrifice, okay?
How do I know you're gonna honor this?
You don't. Because you have no power here. Now bend over.
There's a pretty telling section in one of Marty Supreme's other inspirations, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, also about a Jewish kid in the 1950s running through various schemes on a course to gain wealth and status. And on being scolded by his enlightened socialist uncle on how depraved and sickening he finds his behavior, Duddy breaks and tells him,
I never read a book? I've read books, big deal. They always make fun of guys like me. Push-shirkers, guys that want to get somewhere. If you're so concerned, how come in real life you never ever had time for me? You think I should be running after something else besides money? Good, you tell me what, you bastard!
I'd like to relate this to a popular hypothetical that keeps coming up on social media, presenting a group of people forced to choose between two buttons. A red button that will save only the people who press it, if that's what the majority pick, and a blue button, which, if that's what the majority pick, saves everyone. And the logic of the blue button says, since this is the only choice that says nobody gets hurt, that's the right option. And the logic of the red button says, since this is the only option that says I definitely don't get hurt, that's the right option. In fact, it's the only option that doesn't force someone to gamble their own life. Even without the red-blue color scheme, there's a lot of ways you could project this question onto political or moral ideas. At its core, it's a contrived construction that will inevitably encourage some to pick self-interest. It is a system designed to turn choices that would hurt other people into rational decisions. And it's not like morality can't, again, be projected back onto this, either to say the red button people are evil for prioritizing themselves, or the blue button people are responsible for their own bad decisions and deserve it. But the calculations being made aren't just moral ones, and it's exactly why that scolding falls on such deaf ears. That's not making excuses for immoral actions, it's observing the same thing the red button pushers are in the hypothetical. When a system makes certain options the most clearly reasonable ones, individuals are shaped by that, and so those individuals' flaws become an expression of the flaws in that system. Incidentally, the obvious correct answer is blue.
We get no sense of how he came to this talent, how he maintains it, and he puts no real value on it himself throughout the movie. Again, he barely works at any point to hone it, and he thinks nothing of cheapening it for the worst kind of short-term gain. He only seems to care about it to the extent that he can leverage it to inflate his ego.
Marty transparently models himself on the winners of his society, ruthless capitalists like Kevin O'Leary's Rockwell, eager to create opportunities for money to be spun, because as he fully knows, money rules the world and the people with that money certainly aren't worrying themselves about being virtuous or conventional. And there's a reason this is all presented in an out-of-time style with an 80s soundtrack and 2020s dialogue, and Kevin O'Leary, Shark Tank Kevin O'Leary, is the face of this, even though I don't think it was worth the bit to actually hire him. Because the film isn't speaking to one certain guy who happens to be a certain way, it's speaking to an infectious hustle culture that traces itself hundreds of years before Marty right to the present day, going on, like a vampire would. Did you know Marty Supreme was originally going to end with Marty in the 80s getting bit on the neck by Kevin O'Leary at a Tears for Fears concert? I just thought I should mention it. Marty fails himself and everyone else in his orbit, and that isn't a mistake the filmmakers left in. It's not a thing we're meant to forget so we can believe Marty has a deep down heart of gold. It's showing how people like Milton and Marty are each shaped and uplifted by this culture, a culture that doesn't trade on moral virtue as an end unto itself, and effectively makes that virtue another material part of us, like organs or blood plasma, something to be sold off, or just used as blackmail to return us to our proper station.
I'll work for you however you want, I will lose, I'll have no personal point of view apart from making your event a success.
This is where I want to distinguish something. Up to this point, I could see someone saying, if you're so against people moralizing this story, like saying it's bad because it thinks Marty is good, Aren't you also moralizing it by saying it's good because it thinks Marty is bad? And, you know, if you think that, why don't you just make your own response video if you're so smart, which you probably won't because you're scared. I wouldn't measure the beauty of Marty Supreme on how good of a take Josh Safdie or Timothée Chalamet have on it. Ultimately, movies are restricted to what the characters tell us or the camera shows us, and the rest has to be evaluated by each viewer. As a point of personal taste, it's going to vary person to person. As a point of criticism, I think it's incredibly limiting to take a story largely about how morality functions in modern life and judge it almost exclusively morally. It's like, if I'm the inspector at the box factory and I say, hey, did you notice the box machine keeps setting these boxes on fire? And you say, look, that box is on fire. So I added this analogy at the last second, I'm really sorry. Yeah, as far as judging it that way, I'd say it means something, that the entire movie is just a big mess Marty makes and his failures to clean it up.
Please, I'm humbling myself
You're
before
making
you.
me sick.
I'm sorry.
I do think it works as a moral cautionary tale, a standard fall from grace story about a bad man becoming worse and losing. If we were just arguing on that level, yeah, I think it's pretty explicit. But it also means something that Marty's failures are almost never because of his immorality. Marty gets shut down, for the most part, because he is utterly unprepared for the world he is trying to enter.
Martin would like to be an actor, but unfortunately, he's not very good.
You know, I have many talents, but the one I'm most proud of is the ability to smell bullshit from a mile away.
I'm being completely sincere.
Because fake it till you make it is pretty solid advice as an overachieving lower-class prole, where ambitious schemes might bring some hope or at least novelty to the people around him. They even have just enough novelty to charm the one person who might relate to Marty's position.
Your energy, I don't care. I would have stolen from me too.
But in a world where people have already found success, have already worked out their own schemes, and are well-versed and suspicious of potential interlopers, Marty's overconfidence is nakedly exposed for what it is. A bluff concealing zero power or leverage. Do they care if Marty is selfish or immoral? Do they care if he once used a dog to try and squeeze money out of an old man, or took money from an employer to pay for a plane ticket? Almost certainly not. Rockwell beats Marty in a back room with a paddle, and that's literally just for fun. Would these things be used as leverage against Marty if that were ever needed? Almost certainly. Would there be some personal moral judgments on Marty? Possibly, depending on the inclination of the men in these rooms. And would anyone in any way spare a thought to these victims of Marty for all the ways he took advantage of them? Absolutely no. Change a few variables and they'd be doing the exact same thing. That final ping-pong battle tells us very little about Marty on a moral level. Maybe you could say it shows honesty breaking through, or it's just his ego pushing him to knowingly make a bad business decision. What it definitely does tell us is that Marty was sincere in his dedication to table tennis, something he may have told us repeatedly, but only feels truly demonstrated here. And that's what kills him. Not his heart of gold, not him being just too much of a threat to handle, merely the fact that there remains one solitary thing Marty is able to be sincere about that isn't strictly tied to material gain, something he could only prove to himself in this one extremely specific situation. Basic moral reasoning implies some kind of even ground. It is wrong to do certain things to people based on the understanding that they aren't planning to do the same to you. And in that we can see moral failings, the times people either mistakenly or knowingly took advantage of another person's kindness. But most people don't live in such an abstract, neutral world. They live in one of absurd inequalities where it's well understood who will or won't be judged for the same essential sins, where everything is a constant fight to at least not be the person getting hustled, which makes morality another currency that must be spent responsibly. Sell your morality, sell your identity, sell your values, and that is the machine that people, whether it's Rachel or Marty or their child, are born into. And I would say knowing that might make me cry in the same situation. Oh wait, it did. By the way, I also didn't take an AI sponsorship on this video. So if you want to support me, you can do so over on Patreon or Ko-fi. I don't know if anyone else will find this as funny as me, but there's a weirdly common fan theory that the ending of Marty Supreme is actually Timothée Chalamet crying because he realizes the baby isn't his. And specifically, Marty is crying with joy because now he can stay locked in on ping pong. And honestly, there's nothing explicitly saying this isn't true. And I'm sure at least a handful of people watching just assumed that was the ending. And if you're one of them, I love you. Now, this ending would mean that the opening scene of these two having sex is then just mixed in with unrelated footage of a different guy's sperm on a different occasion, which would be kind of bullshit, but it's plausible, technically, and it does immediately turn this emotional moment into effectively a cheap punchline about Marty's inability to change. Another fan suggests an alternate ending for the film, based on Safdie's description of it as a little bit like seeing your parents before you were born, suggesting that if that was the point of Marty Supreme, there should have been a flash forward at the end where it turns out an older, wiser Marty is recounting this story to his kids. Now, I'll be honest, whoever likes this suggestion, I love you less. But both of these ideas point to a desire for something from this ending. Clarity. Clarity of who this ending implies Marty will become, either definitively growing past his old life and turning it into his lessons, or not. We can only project what we think Marty's breakdown implies. Through Anthony's lens, we're seeing the movie trick us into sympathy by fabricating a human element in Marty where none exists. For the reasons I've gone over, I think there's a huge amount of humanity displayed through Marty in this film without necessarily conflating it with good moral worth. And I guess based on recent experiences, my own lens currently leans to that of a parent. When I became a parent, I felt overwhelming anxiety that still hasn't fully gone away. Obviously partly just like, oh, I don't want my baby to die, but also because of the ways I knew I was going to raise him. Because I want my kid to be honest and fair and sincere, and even where possible to care about helping others. And I'm also aware of the fact that the world is filled with entities that relentlessly prey on caring and sincere people, and openly teach and encourage others to do the same. I speak pretty frequently about corporate manipulation and exploitation, and I don't think those things will magically go away in the next 10 years. So on some level, knowing the world is laid out the way it is, I really have to ask myself, does hope pilling and sincerity maxing my boy mean he's gonna get mogged by society? There's nothing inherently purifying about becoming a parent. Many people become parents and fundamentally don't change at all. All it does is provoke a brief moment of realization. Like literally realization. The world for a moment feels more real because there is a new, unique life in it that exists because of you. And for a second, the invented world, the imaginary world constructed by you and the society around you, the world of goals and ambitions and self-identity, all just dissolves. There is a physical life and you are physically responsible for it. And that's just so fucked up. I think Josh Safdie's own comments on parenthood relating to this ending in some ways back up my perspective, and in some ways back up Anthony's. In his own words, I think the movie is about change and about how dreams are probably the strongest agents of change, and the failure or success of those dreams, the realization of those dreams. Having a kid is like Marty's one dream had to end so the other one could begin. It's seeing Marty actually go from boy to man. I don't for a second doubt that this reaction from Marty is sincere, and I certainly don't think he's crying happy tears because the baby doesn't look enough like him. I think he is truly reflecting on his responsibility to protect this vulnerable life from the predatory world he himself is an example of. And it's hard not to see in this phrasing of boy to man a positive value judgment, as Anthony claims. Safdie here is clearly talking about a real transformation. But this is also where the movie ends. No old man Marty epilogue, no hints of a future. Done. It is in this way letting itself meet both of our expectations, throwing off the hopelessness the film had worked up to just for a moment to suggest some grand unifying clarity, the same clarity Marty felt when for the first time we see him peer past the ways life has taught him to cynically see and treat the world. But we don't get the clarity of knowing if this will actually change Marty's nature. We get a glimpse at a possibility of an alternate view, born out of fully perceiving this cruel machine machine Marty has spent the whole movie trying to operate. But as far as if Marty will change, if this machine can be stopped, I mean, you're watching a movie about ping pong. I don't think it'd be that hard to write a version of Marty Supreme that'd make critics like this happy without removing this ending. You just change it so there are more times Marty chooses the right thing even though it isn't the most practical option, or have more of the negative things play out through pure bad luck. And then you can kind of feel like he's earned it when he doesn't get beheaded by Ira in the end. In fact, scrap most of the side quests and focus the whole thing a lot more on Marty locking in with his ping pong while doing his best to make an honest living. And then you can even root for him and cheer at the end, and feel a little more secure in how you imagine the world to be. It's a place where good people are rightly rewarded and the bad guys can be spotted a mile away. I'm very much glad we didn't get that story here. I think there's a lot more use in a story encouraging us to scrutinize the simplistic old narratives we're often fed, and where movies from Scarface to The Wolf of Wall Street have explored very similar ground. They have also been easily endorsed by the people the films are critical of, soaking in the aesthetic while ignoring any possible message. In content and aesthetic, I think Marty Supreme is a much harder film to do that to, truly reveling in what makes stories like this pathetic, without ever fully giving up on them, and in doing that, commenting on a culture and a mindset that is very much still relevant to the present day. Because I heard there's a lot of hustlers out there lately, telling a lot of convenient white lies, and personally, I'd like to know on what stormy shores their doubloons are buried. Sorry, this was originally a Pirates of the Caribbean script. This was originally going to be the start of an even bigger video on more things, but frankly, for the last 4 months, I've been horribly distracted by my child and unable to get much finished. If any parents who work from home have any general advice, please feel free. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for any support you feel like giving with super chats or tips on Ko-fi or Patreon. I'm still working on my book, and I'll probably do updates on that soon. Thank you for watching. Thank you. I might actually talk about the pit.